All right, anyway, welcome everyone. We're glad you're here this evening. Thank you very much for coming on a cold and not snowy yet night in Victoria. This is session 3 in the Greater Victoria Peace School Fall Speaker Series. So a few of you, I recognize some faces. Who's been here for 1 and 2? Look at you, committed souls. Thank you so much for coming back. That's great. And first timers? Oh, well, welcome. It's lovely to see you. It's really nice to have you here. My name is Michelle Leroux. I do a little bit of the MC work here, and I also make sure that you know the most important things. Men's washrooms out the doors to the left, women's washrooms out the doors to the right. Our session tonight will be finishing up around 8, and we've got a few treats at the end for those of you who participate fully. So get ready. We do encourage mask wearing for those of you who feel inclined that way. That's absolutely wonderful. It is the flu season, so we're all trying to take care of each other. In the spirit of this entire Peace School, we're trying to do the right thing. I wanted to thank you all very much for coming. I also want to thank and acknowledge the Lekwungen people, also known as the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations communities, for sharing these lands on which we play, live, make our living, and of course learn, which is what we're here to do. Tonight's topic is titled, What a Peace Economy Looks Like, and our speaker, Colin Stewart, has already shared with most of us a very interesting perspective on the alternative ways of thinking about economics through the 2 films, one film and one TED Talk, that he recommended that we all take the opportunity to watch before coming. That was a bit of taking a drink from a fire hose, wasn't it? For those of you who saw it, how many people had an opportunity to watch the film? Oh, look at you. Good work. Okay. The opportunity this evening is to use a little bit of what was in that film. Colin will share some perspectives. He has a long history of working in this arena, and particularly having spoken on topics related to economics and growth economies and so on at a variety of educational institutions in various parts of the country, as well as being a part of a peace activism movement for many, many years. So there's a lot of connections between what he's going to be talking about the peace movement, about ecology and economics, and basically the state of the world. So without further proverbial ado, please welcome Colin Reed.
The first thing I'm going to do, before we go any further, I'm assuming, number one, that most of you, or at least some of you, have seen the video. That's the long one, the 90-minute one. Now, some of you may not. And when you came in tonight, you saw 2 little slips of paper. One of them says green growth. Sam Fackenhauser was the one person in an Oxford discussion. It wasn't exactly a debate, although in part it was, mediated by Kate Raworth. And his assertion is that climate change is a problem we can solve within the growth paradigm. That is, growth as we know it, measured usually by the gross domestic product. And I can go back on those definitions if you need them. The second one was a longer definition, degrowth, by Jason Hickel, who probably today is at least Europe's, possibly the world's most prominent person respecting degrowth and what that means. And his definition, a planned and democratic reduction of less necessary forms of production in rich countries to bring economics into balance with the living world in a safe, just, and equitable way. So we have 2 different conceptions here. Now, before we ask you to choose which conception or which understanding you have, I would ask you just kind of say a few words about where we want to go tonight. One is to understand what Kate is saying by her, you've got it there, her understanding, which is basically a new understanding of economics. To get through that, to understand what growth is, to what her alternative looks like, and it isn't just hers, it's also Jason Hickel's. Kind of get our heads around that, at least in an initial way, because it is not the economics we usually know from the Globe and Mail financial page or the Financial Post. The second thing we hope to do is at least begin to tie a new conception of what economics are and ask, I don't know whether we'll be able to answer it, but ask the question, can we have a military machine and can we have peace under the current growth paradigm? Let's just kind of reflect on that for a minute. So that'll be the second question. But the first question is this one, the one you have in your little sheets of paper there.
Can you say the second question again? And the part about military machine.
Can we have the military machines? And I'm going to read, I mean, it's not just Canada, it's not, and so on. Can we have the military machines that we take for granted today without growth?
Oh, I see.
Okay, let me frame it that way.
Okay.
I'm going to come back on another dilemma that Kate has posed for us. But let's first let's spend just a quick 2 minutes. Be sure you're clear about the question. And I would like those who are for green growth on this side, and those on this side who understand and think that we have to go a degrowth route. And I'm going to say a few words about vocabulary later, but just look at what you have in your 2 sheets, decide which way you would go and move over there. Because how many of you pick up the Times Colonist every day?
Jen.
How many pick up the Globe and Mail every day? How many read the Financial Times? What do you read? In the morning. What is it that you read that governs what you think about the economy? Think about it for a minute.
BBC News.
Pardon?
CBC.
CBC.
BBC.
Okay.
The Guardian.
So, the Guardian?
Yeah.
Guardian's interesting on that. That raises a good question.
New York Times.
The Tyee?
Pardon?
The Tyee, does that count?
The Tyee, in my opinion, even better. I'm a little bit surprised, but not too, knowing the audience, where most of you, or I think I know the audience well enough to know that most of you are concerned about some way of reducing patterns of growth and consumption. We kind of sense and we know that. And I'm going to pose to you, just at this moment, this exercise is one that Kate actually does with her students, Kate Raworth, the person who's mediating the video. And what Kate does, she says, usually it splits evenly.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, she has in her classes,
Oh.
she's got a mix of students from school of business, school this, and so on and so forth. But she says, you know, when this happens, here's what I come down to, and I'm going to quote her. She says, no country has ever ended human deprivation without a growing economy. She counterposes that with, and no country has ever ended ecological degradation with one. There's no country that's ended ecological degradation with a growing economy. You know, I mean, that's our gut feeling. I mean, she's not posing this, she's posing this as the terms of her dilemma. And then she's saying, okay, this is our dilemma. And both she and Jason Hickel, Jason says we have to have degrowth. And he's, as it's defined there, and that's a direct quote from the video that you have there, that we have to have it. Kate says she's agnostic about it. But when you read a little bit deeper in what she says, she's not really that agnostic about it. But she says, I just don't know how we're going to get out of this. And then she says, if we're going to find a way out of it, we have to come up with some kind of a model of an economy that looks like that. So, I mean, Nobody's pretending these are easy answers or easy pieces. I'm going to go through, and maybe it resonates perhaps with you, some of the elements historically that we understand as growth, where they come from. Now there's, let me caution you because the book I'm working from is this one, but there's also one by Jason Hickel, which is quite good. And it's a whole book. I'm not going to try and even begin to cover any of that. But I'm going to talk about 3 elements of growth that whenever we go in to a store here, whenever we pick up a paper, when we listen to, and I'm talking about mainstream media here generally, when we pick them up, I could go through any edition of the Globe and Mail Financial, and it would operate on the assumption that growth, we need growth, and growth is measured by the gross domestic product. That's what we get constantly. And what Kate is saying, and what Jason are saying, is wrong road, wrong way to go. If we kind of crawl behind the meaning of the term growth, I went way back. I should also be a little bit humble here. I have only taken one economics course in my life. Where I learned my economics was from my students, most of whom were from Africa, Asia, and Latin America, who said we're fed up with structural adjustment. We're fed up with all this stuff and kind of projects and dams and everything else. And I could go on forever about that. And I had to learn my economics through what they said. That's where I'm coming from in this. So there are holes in my understanding of what today is called microeconomics, or let's call it growth economics. But what is growth? First, it's an idea that's expressed as a policy. And it's measured in gross domestic product. Gross domestic product is the sum of all the goods and services produced in a country, by that country, measured in dollars. In other words, now there are slightly different ways of measuring the gross domestic product, but they all amount to the same thing. A dollar value placed on goods and services produced in any given year in the country, in a country. I won't get into the difference between a gross domestic product and gross national product. They're not the same thing. The point here is that it's measured in terms of dollars of things produced. Where does this come from? We think of it as kind of, the gross domestic product is the label of all the BMWs. It's the BMW. And it's produced every year. A new edition is produced every year. But it's been around for a long time, but it hasn't been around that long. When I say I took a welfare economics course many, many years ago, longer than I care to remember, the first thing we were told was that this is a different kind of economics, but it wasn't really. That you and I are embedded in a system that tells us that we have to measure value in dollars of goods and goods, service. Now, if you go back a little further, just after World War II, and up to World War II, there was no such thing as gross domestic product. We've been sold the idea of gross domestic product. In welfare economics, there was all kinds of other measures. But gross domestic product is the one that is now the kind of idée fixe of our economy. If I'm in a car accident and I call a tow truck, that person in the tow truck is providing me with a service. And I'm given a bill, an invoice for $300, right? It's carted off to the Police Pound or wherever. That item of $300 enters the books of gross domestic product. That's seen as an increase in the gross domestic product. Then I take it to the mechanic, and he charges me $700 to replace the front fender, and includes his labor. That's added to the gross domestic product. And I could go on. I mean, the examples are infinite. This is the reality. I mean, I'm caricaturing it in a way, but that's the reality of how our economy grows or is measured. And I think Saul is quite right. Part of the task that Kate was facing in coming up with her donut there is, how do we measure it? How do we determine what the economy is that doesn't account for growth? I mean, we could go on all night for examples of this increasing commodification, as Saul said, of all the services we require. And my wife is here. She's over at the back. And quite rightly, she will tell me if I'm talking about this at home, but you've forgotten about all the work that's done at home. And that is so true.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, there are things that aren't, but when you look at it, the work that's done at home, 99% of it by women, sustains all the rest. See what's happening there? You get that kind of. So a number of years ago, there was, in fact, among the women, many women saying, look, I want to be paid for the housework I'm doing. That was, I want my labor to become commodified and put on the market. We can talk about that, but it's real. So growth as a measure of gross domestic product largely happened since World War II, largely happened as a consequence of the Bretton Woods discussions. I won't go into the details, but the formation of the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, Bank of Settlements, and so on and so forth. They all needed statistical measures. And Keynes kind of yawned and said, okay, you guys, we'll do it. We'll go that way. But there's another element. Growth is also a social process, as we understand it. And as a social process, it's embedded in something much earlier. And here we know this kind of is, in a way, detached from the economy, but this isn't cotton. Let's say this is cotton. It's not, but come back to that. Where did that cotton come from? It could have come from Eastern China, from Xinjiang. It could have come from Sudan. Could have come from Somalia. Could have come, probably not, from southern United States, wherever. But if you look at the overall history and background for the cotton economy, it was a consequence of the expulsion or extraction from the land and the expulsion from the land of indigenous peoples, and most importantly, the importation of slaves. And that's growth as a social process in its crudest terms.
Buying and selling slaves, that would be a way to...
Exactly. Buying and selling slaves, I forgot, what's the CPR entrepot in the mountains out here? When Louisiana when the Louisiana state was purchased from France, it was Barings Bank, British Barings Bank, that lent the money. The money and when that money was paid back, it was used to buy slaves. It was also used as a significant part of John A. MacDonald's money for the construction of the CPR. I won't go into the details of that history. I probably couldn't remember them all now. But it's a reality that we have to deal with. That our economy, as a growth economy, is embedded in an historical process that is really hard to recognize and seldom mentioned and seldom brought up. So that's the other piece. And that's another piece that Kate and Jason were dealing with in this whole question. And it's called capitalism. And we're getting more used to thinking about this, not just as kind of the way it is, but it's a problem. You know, it's something we have to deal with. The other element is growth. And the third one I want to mention is growth as a biophysical process. And in your sheets here, in your handout, I'd like you to look at this one right here. I was kind of flabbergasted when I first saw this. Now, if we took all the biomass in the world, trees, grass, plants, fish, everything else, took the water out of them, dried them out, and piled them up, you would be looking at a dry weight of 1.2 trillion tons. Does everybody see what I'm looking at there? That's on the vertical axis of that. And so over time, biomass has remained fairly steady. That's mass, the weight. Okay. And then start looking at 1900 and look at all the anthropogenic mass, that is man-created, human-created mass. It's exceeding the biomass. It includes concrete, aggregates, bricks, asphalt, metals, most plastics. Those have gone up like that. Every one of those has required some energy to produce.
Can you explain what anthropogenic mass is?
Human-made mass. Things like concrete, cement,
Oh,
rock, gravel, bricks, asphalt, metals, all the metals in your car, most of the plastics in our cars,
I see.
all of that. The total of, I mean, when copper sits in the ground, it just sits there. It has to be extracted. As soon as it's extracted, somebody's adding value to it. But they're also changing it into pipes, into wires, into cables, and it's added as human-made anthropogenic mass. And it takes some energy to do that. And that's what we have to think about. The amount of energy that goes, I mean, there's a whole lot of other complications to it. Bill, is the increase in anthropogenically human-created mass and all the effects that has on the world. Just think about it. It's huge. How much of the road area of the city of Victoria is covered in asphalt? And how much energy was used in getting that asphalt there? How much less asphalt would there be if we relied almost exclusively, barring some real needs that people have, almost exclusively on public transport? Begin to kind of, the implications begin to kind of soak through. You may need some asphalt, but boy, it's going to take a lot of oil, so how can we figure out how we can use less of it and deal with this? And that's not just at the individual level, you know, how much gas comes in when we turn the stove on. It's right through the whole society. All of this is, these three elements, and there are many kind of variations on the whole thing, we can talk about, and it's the problem that Kate, in her donut economics, is talking about. And that's where we come to the front piece on this. And she actually she published this, I suppose she did her work on this back starting in 2014, 2013 maybe. It took her a fairly long time. I think she was at the London School of Economics. She just got fed up with Economics 101, microeconomics. She says there's got to be a better way. Knowing what do we know? So, I have some problems with Kate, but I won't go into those now. I don't think she takes account of power and power relationships enough, but she's done a beautiful job on this. And she just said, and she kind of boiled it all down, what are the 9 ecological boundaries we have to live in? And they're all there. Climate change, ocean acidification, chemical pollution, nitrogen and phosphorus overloading of the water in the atmosphere and the soil particularly, freshwater withdrawals, land conversion, biodiversity loss, air pollution, and ozone layer depletion. She says, these are the boundaries we know, given the whole geophysical way that the life on Earth is. We start crossing those and we start losing. We're in effect killing. I mean, she wouldn't use those words, but that's the kind of perspective she had. And still has. You saw the enthusiasm with which she put into that stuff. But there's also some social foundations that we're dependent on. Water, food, health, education, income and work, peace and justice, political voice, social equity, gender equality, housing, networks, energy, particularly energy. These are things we need to be human. And she's saying, there's that green zone you see there, that's what we have to live within. And that's what the economy has to function in. But you can't measure that with GDP. I mean, it's antithetical, as the jargon has it, to GDP. And if we go outside the ecological boundaries, we're essentially destroying the planet we live on. If we're inside those boundaries, if we don't have enough education, food security, and so on, then we see what we have in this world. Poverty, inequality, starvation, and so on. I mean, she spends a long time going through all these. I'm not going to go through, I don't think I need to persuade anybody that this is kind of the reality we're dealing with. So the question that comes back to us, and how am I doing for time? I bought a Swatch 3 years ago, and I discovered tonight that the battery had run out.
Oh.
So when we started, my watch was reading 10 to 6. And I couldn't, anyway. How are we doing for time?
It's 7:10.
7:10, okay. We may actually, we're doing okay. The first thing I'm going to talk about is fuel consumption. Get into something that's really in some ways hard to deal with, and it's hard for me to describe it verbally. I should have put another diagram in there. And this is something called decoupling. That is, when you look at all of those boundaries, ecological boundaries, a key element is the energy consumption, the fossil fuels we're using. That has to stop. How do we detach or decouple ourselves from the fossil fuel economy? I drove a car here tonight. How many of you drove a car here? Absolutely. Sorry? Great.
I did drive an electric.
Yeah, I should have brought my bike, but I was lazy. So I got in the car. We have to get off if we want to continue living the fossil. Describe it. How many have you read Ursula Le Guin? You know, I haven't read her for quite a while, but I know she's just one. If you want a kind of model of what, kind of idealized or Platonic model of what a new economy or a new world, a peace economy would look like, start reading Ursula Le Guin. That's not where I'm going. I'm not describing something that's going to happen 30 years from now and it's going to look like this. No. But there are some elements that we know where we can go. And the first element is this process of decoupling. And I want to talk about it a little bit more because it can be confusing for me and for all of us. We have to decouple ourselves from the fossil fuel economy. There's no doubt about that. And I'll put in brackets here. I'm going to come back to this in terms of defense expenditures, war expenditures. But let's leave that for now. We have to decouple ourselves in many ways. If you watch the news and hear about what the oil companies are telling you about the tar sands, they said, oh, we're just really doing well. Our efficiency is going up. We're getting, we're just using less energy to produce, more oil all the time. So our energy efficiency is increasing. It ain't working that way. But they have sometimes, not all the time, I think they're a bit wiser about it, they call that decoupling. They've started to pull apart a little bit by saying we're using less energy and so on. Has anybody heard of the Jevons principle? No? The Jevons principle. This is one it's a real puzzler, but it's kind of what I'm getting at. The price of gas went up to how much a liter here?
$2.40 something.
$2.40 a liter or something. I think it's down under $2 now.
$1.70 something.
$1.70. So what's happened here? And this may not be absolutely true. You'll get the idea. If I go on the day 3 months ago or whenever it was and bought a liter of gas or 100 liters of gas or whatever it was at $2.40, I would say the next time I go for gas at that price, I'm not gonna put as much in my tank. I can't afford it. Okay. Now, fuel price goes down. What happens? More people buy gas. More gas is used, despite the efficiency. You see what I'm getting at here? In economics, it's called the Jevons paradox. That often when you seek efficiency, particularly in the production of fuel, you actually increase the aggregate use of the fuel. And this can run through, it can be you give a kid, he's going to buy some bubble gum for 10 cents, but if you really make your bubble gum factory really, really good, and you save energy in the production, you can produce 2 pieces of bubble gum. But your kid's going to eat 4 because it's cheaper. So you have this increased use, or if you like, increased consumption as a consequence of ostensible efficiency in the use of energy.
Heat pumps.
It's the Jevons paradox, it's called.
Heat pumps.
Pardon?
Heat pumps.
Exactly.
Well, that might be a great example of the heat pumps.
The which, sorry?
Heat pumps might just
Heat
be
pumps.
a really great example because we do say, well, gosh, that's a much more energy efficient way of heating your home. But is everyone now going to just relax and say, well, I might as well just set my thermostat to whatever I like, day in, day out?
My hydro bill is half what it was
Same
before my
way.
heat pump.
I know the mathematics of this can get complicated on a case-by-case basis. I don't pretend that I could go there right now. I can't. It would take me another few days to get into the books of it. But it is a consistent principle, and it's one that's used, or no, not used, it's one that's overlooked in what we hear in the media about efficiency and the efficiency in the use of fuel. We really have to think about it. So that piece is there. And it's kind of not the only thing, but a key element in what I would call a peace economy, or a no-growth, a degrowth economy will look like. The other thing I think we have to recognize that none of this reduced fuel, what we want in an economy, public transportation, hospital services, the whole range of things, It's going to have to be planned, but we know what planning has meant, particularly us older folks, in the context of the old Cold War. And the whole, we're not looking at centralized planning. We're going to have to look about, and as Jason said, at some democratically controlled and planned economy. And the key word there is democratic. You know, one of the most, I read him all the time because I think it's really important. He's actually pretty good. That columnist in the Globe and Mail, what's his name?
Andrew Coyne?
The guy at issue. Andrew Coyne. He's got some pretty good stuff in there, but he's still very conservative on this one. And he will argue that the market can take care of it all. That's what, I mean, when you boil everything down, that's what he says.
We see how the market took care of it already.
Pardon me?
We see how it's taken care of things already.
Exactly.
We go down Pandora and look at it.
Exactly, and his response to that is, well, if we regulate this and regulate that and regulate this, but on the scale of the changes we need, it seems to me, we're going to have to do some planning. We can't rely on the market. The trick is to do consistent planning that's democratically done, and that is, I don't have an answer, but it seems to me that if we talk about a from the top planned central economy, we know that's been a disaster, at least in many respects, maybe not totally. But how do we have a democratically planned economy for what we want? And that means the whole political process of engaging in a way that we have to talk and listen to each other and decide. Move on. The question is, how do you move people into the mold that says this is what has to happen locally? And then there is a question of where do you move from the local, I guess, I mean, this is a very crude example, but okay, we need public transportation. We're really going to locally encourage our bicycle producers, you know, get somebody in here. But there's a lot of bicycle needed in this country, you know? And so how do you scale up the whole question of what's done locally in planning to something that moves us into a provincial or regional, even national kind of thing? All kinds of huge questions on that, which years ago, well, I'm going to mention my third element in a peace economy. It would be an economy of the commons. Now that we have become so used, and I'm sounding like a horrible moralist. We have become so used to the privatization of almost commodification of almost everything. And the most sensitive one, obviously, is land and water. This is really a tough one. But that's a peculiarity. Again, we go back to the historical growth thing. You know, the abandonment of the commons in England led to the immigration in this country, in Cape Breton and Eastern Canada. You know, there was the enclosure movement, privatize that land, make it something that's commodified and saleable. Instead of going another route locally, how can we work with that land in common at the local level? And we've got a really tough one there because underneath, personally, I think this has a lot to do with our relationships with indigenous people in this area. Because the land was not perceived, it certainly wasn't perceived as a commodity, as something that was partitionable. And if you look around the world and you see Bolivia, the land is put into the Constitution as something sacred. It's not a commodity. You know, we're getting into really difficult terrain here, but any kind of peace economy at some level is going to have to deal with the commons. We could talk about water, we might even talk about air, but this is what we're looking at. that kind of thing, in terms of some kind of, not, I hope, in too distant a future. The other thing at a very practical level, probably more approximate, closer in time, in a peace economy, there would be caps on income and wealth with cooperative redistribution for health and social security. Something very, but you know,
You keep calling that a peace economy, but that's just the label that you apply.
That's
You don't
the
know
label
why
on-
you don't know why you're using that label.
we'll come back to that. But I'm going to, I'll say why right bluntly right now. I don't think we can have a degrowth economy, or we can have the kind of thing I'm describing without a commitment to peace in the larger sense, and that means disarmament. That means, I'll come back to the nature of that anyway. So, caps on income and wealth. There are really good examples of this. There are problems as well. Most of you have heard of Mondragon? The Mondragon factories? Mondragon, when they first started, they put a 3-to-1 cap on salaries. That is, the highest paid person could be earning no more than 3. It's now moved to 6-to-1, and they're having a big quarrel about it right now. The point is, you have 100,000 workers cooperatively owning a whole range of businesses, enterprises, really good enterprises in Spain, with these caps, with these democratically accepted and understood caps on income. And then you think about that in the context of redistribution and our nursing shortage, low pay for nurses, and things begin to add up in a different way. Okay? So that's the fourth element. Peace economy, there would be caps in income and wealth. Bill, you're looking.
Well, at this point,
He lied over a piece there because I think we're going to be a bit short. The other element I wanted to mention, two other elements in a peace economy. And I'm just going to cite them because it's a long, difficult, not difficult, but interesting but lengthy discussion. In a peace economy, there would be convivial and democratic technology. And this is a whole other set of questions. But we all know what Jeff Bezos and all the Twitter nonsense that's going on. It's being monopolized, our electronics technology. I'll just say that. There's a whole element here that needs to be looked at. Another element in a peace economy, and this is really, again, a longer explanation, but I think in so many ways it's absolutely critical. A peace economy would require the dismantling and reconstruction of production. The shoes I've got on, the chairs, the stand, everything. Based on use values and not exchange values. I bought these marker pens at Staples. I could pick up anything here. I bought them at Staples. I bought them because they were going to be useful to me. And we really have to think about money. It's a complex, essential, but difficult discussion. But I paid, I don't know how much they were. They weren't that expensive, but there was a price on them. That's the price I paid is the exchange value. The use value is something quite different. You know, if these were really scarce, if you couldn't get them at Staples, maybe there was 2 left and 40 people that wanted them, their exchange value would go right up to the point where the use value, you'd have to just say, I can't afford it. They're really useful to me, but I can't afford it. This is a tough concept, but it's something I won't get into tonight, but we really need to look at, and in some ways forms the heart of what peace economy would look like. Now, I'm using the term peace economy. There are other kind of terms that are bundled. A care economy,
Which?
a care economy, a solidarity economy, particularly spoken of quite widely in certain cooperatives and communities in South America, in Latin America. A co-op economy. And there's a whole discussion to be had about co-ops and cooperatives. A long, very detailed discussion. A love economy. A regenerative economy. Regeneration is you know, of the species, the biota we live in, where there is in fact so much violence, particularly home-based. Not everybody, obviously, but there is so much there. I say it's not an easy question. But let me read you some statistics, because politically, we'll take different views on this. I'll be quite blunt about where I am, but I know I'm a minority. That's okay. My point is not to try and persuade you necessarily of that right now. Is to simply say it's a discussable and debatable question. So for example, I mean, I say it quite clearly. If you look at the figures here, this circle here, right? 56%, and this is the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, 56% of military expenditure are NATO expenditure. We just have to face that reality. Now, every dollar spent on the military, it not only increases greenhouse gases, the emissions, but diverts financial resources, skills, and attention away from the greatest existential threats humanity has ever experienced. And we come right back to the climate crisis. So in answering that debatable question for yourself, and time the scientists, historians are saying what we are experiencing now in this climate crisis is unique. Humanity's never faced this before. There may have been some localized, certainly there were some localized ecological concerns, but as a global, international concern of every single human being, one way or another, we've never faced it before. So the question of military expenditure and the view of what a peace economy would look like, which is a degrowth economy, particularly for Europe and North America, becomes, I think, at the very least, a debatable question. The steady increase in weapons and arms around the world is adding fuel to the climate fire. So true. Stoking violence and conflict and compounding the suffering for those communities most vulnerable to climate breakdown. Think Somalia. Think Sudan. Think Egypt. And the list goes on. The richest countries are spending 30 times as much on their armed forces that they spend on climate finance. 30 times. 7 of the top historical emitters, fossil fuel emitters, carbon emitters, are also among the top 10 global military spenders. Between 2013 and 2021, the richest countries spent, and these figures are incomprehensible, $9.45 trillion on the military. Since 2013, military expenditure has increased 21.3%. A 2020 report by Tipping Point North-South estimated that the carbon footprint of the global militaries and associated arms industries was around 5% of the total greenhouse gas emissions. That was in 2017. By way of comparison, civil aviation accounts for 2% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So those of us who don't fly, fine, or fly rarely, fine. But just remember, those jets passing back and forth that you see, the passenger jets, in total, 2% of greenhouse gas emissions. 5% is emitted in terms of fuel consumption by the militaries. I have yet to see any evidence that the military can go green. Has anybody seen any evidence of it? Yes, they can put heat pumps instead of air conditioners on some of their barracks and some of their offices. Hold this up. I can email you. It's free. It's no charge if folks want it. All of this stuff I'm reciting is coming from the same sources that Tamara's using and so on. This is something called Climate Collateral, put out by the Transnational Institute in Paris. It's got all of this stuff in it. It's really quite revealing. My own view is, personal view, I think we could talk about some kind of national service. This is really another question, or even regional services, but national service instead of the military. Now there's a whole range of questions around that, but if it fit into a kind of donut economics, then we could be talking something concrete. I'm being told that I've only got 10 minutes left. And I want to come back to a question that Bill has posed. It's a bit disjointed, but I want to come back to it. The growth thing, how does it take account of population? This is always a tough one. I'm not going to answer it easily, but the best UN and other demographers, statisticians are now saying human population growth is going to peak in about 2030, 2040. The figures are a bit uncertain. But what I just kind of heard about this the other day and kind of got my head around it. What's happening is a likely population decline around that time. I don't know what the year was exactly. I think it was 2030 or 2040, somewhere in there. And it sounds absurd until you begin to see it through. And it has to do with the age. I think my figures may be off here, but you'll get the idea. The number of children born on average to women in Tanzania 6 or 7 or 20 years ago, quite a while ago, was 6 or 7 children. It's now down to 2.4.
In Tanzania?
Yeah. According to this statistician, it's going down very rapidly. So what we're seeing is a population increase among the older group, but you're seeing a potential eventual decline coming up. Or, I forgot exactly. Do you remember, Ricky? Okay. I'm going to leave you with one rather provocative thought, another quote from Gandhi. We can pick this up. Two things. Number one, he once said in the context of getting the British out of India, he said, first they ignored us, then they laughed at us, then they fought us, then we won. So hey, please be sure your name's on the email list. I think I may propose a longer discussion about this, a house discussion or book study group or something. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.